The electrician went pale and whispered, "Ma'am, someone's been living in your garage wall." The electrician's text came through at 2:47 p.m. "Mrs. Hartley, there's a door behind your garage wall. It has 3 deadbolts. From the outside. I think someone's inside." I read it twice. Then I heard my husband's car pull into the driveway. My name is Diane Hartley. I'm 59 years old. And on that gray February afternoon in Cleveland, standing in my kitchen with my phone trembling in my hand and the smell of coffee going cold on the counter, I had no idea that my entire life was about to collapse. 32 years of marriage, 2 sons raised and launched into the world, a career as a pediatric nurse at Cleveland Clinic that I'd retired from just 18 months earlier, a comfortable 2-story colonial in Lakewood that we'd bought in 1994, back when the neighborhood was still affordable and Richard and I were young enough to believe we knew what forever meant. I heard his keys jingling at the front door. I had maybe 10 seconds to decide what to do. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got here. Richard and I met in the summer of 1989 at a friend's barbecue in Parma. He was 27, working as an insurance adjuster. I was 24, just finishing my nursing degree at Case Western. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who always seemed to have a plan. When other guys my age were still figuring out how to do their own laundry, Richard had a 5-year financial projection and a retirement savings account. I thought that was maturity. I thought that was safety. We married in 1991, bought the Lakewood house 3 years later, and had our sons, Michael in 1995, David in 1998. Richard handled the finances, the house maintenance, the decisions that required what he called a clear head. I handled the boys, the cooking, the emotional labor of keeping a family running. It wasn't a bad marriage. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't filled with screaming or violence or obvious cruelty. It was just controlled. Richard's way was always the way, and I'd learned over the decades not to question it. When he said we didn't need to hire someone to clean the gutters because he'd do it himself, I didn't argue. When he said we shouldn't visit my sister in Toledo more than twice a year because family visits are exhausting, I adjusted. When he installed a lock on the side door of the garage 5 years ago and told me it was because neighborhood kids had been breaking into garages, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. He'd never given me a reason to doubt him. Or so I thought. Richard had one sibling, a younger sister named Ellen. She was 53 now, or would have been, 5 years younger than Richard, with the same sharp jawline and gray-blue eyes, but a completely different temperament. Where Richard was controlled, Ellen was impulsive. Where Richard planned, Ellen leapt. She'd been married once to a man named Greg who sold medical equipment and traveled constantly. The marriage lasted 12 years before imploding in a spectacular fashion. Affairs on both sides, a house neither of them could afford alone, and a divorce that left Ellen with almost nothing. That was in 2017. I remember the phone call, Ellen's voice thick with tears, asking if she could stay with us just for a few weeks while she figured out her next steps. Richard was furious. Not openly. Richard was never openly anything. But I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way he went quiet at dinner for 3 straight days. "She's always been like this," he said one night, standing at the kitchen sink, his back to me. "Always making messes and expecting someone else to clean them up." "She's your sister," I said. "She needs help. She needs to learn consequences." But Ellen came anyway. Richard agreed eventually, with conditions. 2 weeks maximum, she'd sleep in the basement guest room, she'd contribute to groceries, and she'd be actively looking for apartments and jobs the entire time. No figuring herself out on our dime. Ellen arrived on Thursday in late September 2017. She had 2 suitcases, a box of books, and a look in her eyes that I recognized from my years in pediatric nursing. the look of someone who'd been broken and wasn't sure they could be put back together. I made her tea that first night. We sat in the kitchen while Richard watched television in the living room, and she told me about the divorce, about Greg's affairs, about the way she slowly realized that the life she thought she had was built on nothing. "I'm so sorry to impose," she said, her hands wrapped around the mug. "I know Richard doesn't want me here." "You're family," I said. "You're welcome here as long as you need." I meant it. I really did. What I didn't know was that Ellen would only last 11 days in our house before she decided to move to New Zealand. At least, that's what Richard told me. It happened while I was working a double shift at the hospital. Richard called me around 9 p.m., said Ellen had gotten a call from an old college friend who'd moved to Auckland years ago. The friend had a job opportunity for her, something in hospitality, and Ellen had decided, impulsively as always, to take it. "She's already packing," he said. "She wants to leave tomorrow." Tomorrow? I was standing in the nurse's station, exhausted, trying to process this. That seems fast. You know Ellen, she never thinks anything through. When I got home the next morning, Ellen was gone. Her suitcases, her box of books, everything. Richard said he'd driven her to the airport at 5 a.m., that they'd said their goodbyes, that she'd promised to call once she got settled. She didn't call. 2 weeks later, I got a postcard from Auckland. The handwriting looked like Ellen's, loopy, slightly rushed. "Made it safe, still settling in. Will call soon. Love, Ellen." She never called. I sent emails to her old address. They bounced. I tried her phone number. Disconnected. I asked Richard about it, and he shrugged. "You know how she is. She's probably embarrassed. Give her time." So I gave her time. Months, then a year, then 2. I told myself she was building a new life, that she needed space, that she'd reach out when she was ready. I told myself that some people just disappear for a while when they're healing. I told myself a lot of things. Meanwhile, life continued in the Lakewood house. Michael graduated from Ohio State and moved to Denver for a tech job. David followed a girlfriend to Austin and stayed when the relationship ended because he'd fallen in love with the city instead. Richard retired from the insurance company in 2021, 2 years before I retired from nursing. We settled into the quiet rhythm of empty nesters. Morning coffee together, separate afternoons, Richard in the garage with his projects, me reading or gardening or video chatting with the boys. Dinner at 6, television until 9, bed by 10. I didn't notice how little we actually talked. I didn't notice how much of our life was parallel rather than shared. I didn't notice that Richard spent 2 hours every Sunday morning in the garage doing something he never invited me to see. "Just organizing my tools," he'd say if I asked. "You'd find it boring." I did find it boring, so I never pushed. I never walked out to the garage on a Sunday morning to bring him coffee. I never questioned why he'd added a second lock to the storage area in the back, or why he'd started buying industrial-sized packages of granola bars that he said were for an emergency preparedness kit. I trusted him, completely. After 32 years, I thought I knew every corner of his soul. I was wrong. The flickering lights started in January, just the one in the hallway upstairs, nothing dramatic. Richard said it was probably a loose connection, that he'd get to it when he had time. But weeks passed and he didn't get to it. And eventually the flickering spread to the bedroom and I decided to just call someone. Jordan Mackenzie arrived at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. He was young, maybe 26 or 27, with a Cavs cap and a friendly smile. Richard was at his monthly poker game across town. I showed Jordan the flickering lights, then left him to work while I answered emails in the kitchen. Around 2:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Hartley, this is Jordan the electrician. Can you come out to the garage? I need to show you something." I assumed it was related to the wiring. Maybe the junction box was in worse shape than expected. Maybe we needed a permit or a second opinion. I walked out to the garage and Jordan was standing near the back wall, looking pale. He'd moved the metal shelving unit that held old paint cans and holiday decorations, and behind it was something I'd never seen before. A door, painted the same gray as the garage walls, almost invisible. And running down its edge were 3 heavy-duty deadbolts, all locked, all keyed from the outside. I was tracing a wire, Jordan said, his voice unsteady. I moved the shelf to get to the junction box. That's when I saw it. I stared at the door, at the locks. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I don't understand, I said. This wasn't here. We've lived in this house for 30 years. This wasn't… Mrs. Hartley, Jordan's voice dropped. I think I heard something behind the door, like breathing, or someone moving. The garage suddenly felt very cold. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. That's not possible, I said. But even as I said it, I was walking toward the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, and I heard it too. A faint rustle, like fabric shifting, like someone who'd been holding very, very still had finally dared to move. That's when my phone buzzed again, a text from Jordan, though he was standing right next to me. Sorry, sent that earlier before I called out, but Mrs. Hartley, those locks are from the outside. Whoever's in there didn't lock themselves in. I looked at those 3 deadbolts. I thought about Richard's Sunday mornings. I thought about the granola bars. I thought about a postcard from Auckland that arrived exactly when Richard said it would. And I heard my husband's car pulling into the driveway. I don't remember making the decision. I just remember moving. I told Jordan to go wait by his van, to call 911 if I texted him. Then I walked toward the house, intercepting Richard before he could reach the garage. "You're home early," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat, controlled. Poker ended early. Ed's wife called with some emergency. Richard was looking past me at the garage door standing open. "Why is the garage open? Is someone here?" "Electrician, for the flickering light." "Ah." He started walking toward the garage. "I'll go say hello, make sure he's not…" "Richard," I stepped in front of him, "I need to ask you something." He stopped. Something flickered across his face. Was that calculation? Before settling back into neutral concern. "What is it, Diane?" "What's behind the storage shelf in the garage?" The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, I watched my husband's face cycle through surprise, then something defensive, then a kind of emptiness I'd never seen before. A blankness, like a door closing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "There's a door, Richard, with 3 deadbolts on the outside." Another pause. Then he smiled, a small, patient smile, the kind he used when he thought I was being irrational. "Diane, sweetheart, I think you're confused. There's no door back there, just the wall and some old insulation. Maybe the electrician moved something and you're seeing shadows." "I touched it, Richard. I heard someone breathing behind it." The smile stayed fixed, but something in his eyes went cold. "You need to stop this," he said quietly. "Go inside. I'll deal with the electrician." And that's when I knew. I knew with absolute certainty that my husband was lying, that he'd been lying for a long time, and that whatever was behind that door, he didn't want me to find it. I took out my phone and texted Jordan one word: now. The police arrived in 14 minutes. 2 squad cars, 4 officers. Jordan had called while Richard and I stood in the driveway in a silence so thick it felt like drowning. Richard kept his composure the entire time, answered the officers' questions politely, expressed confusion about the door, suggested that perhaps the previous owners had built some kind of storage space he didn't know about. The officers weren't convinced. They asked if he had keys to the deadbolts. "I don't even know what you're talking about." "Diane, tell them this is a misunderstanding." I didn't say anything. I just watched. They found the keys in his desk drawer, the same drawer he always kept locked, the one he said contained old tax documents and nothing you'd find interesting. 3 keys, 3 deadbolts. One by one, they opened. The smell came first. Stale air, human sweat, something musty and closed in. One of the officers shined a flashlight into the space, and I heard him inhale sharply. "Ma'am," he said, turning to me, "I need you to prepare yourself." I stepped forward. I looked into that space, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, insulated with foam, windowless, containing a narrow cot, a bucket with a lid, stacks of paperback novels, and a battery-powered lantern.
And sitting on the cot, blinking in the sudden light, skeletal thin, her hair gray and matted, her skin the color of someone who hasn't seen sunlight in years, was Ellen, Richard's sister, my sister-in-law, the woman who had moved to New Zealand 6 years ago. She looked at me with eyes that took a moment to focus, and when she spoke, her voice was rusted, broken, barely a whisper. "Diane, he told me he'd kill you if you screamed." I don't remember the next few minutes clearly. I know I stumbled backward. I know someone caught me, maybe Jordan or one of the officers. I know Richard was shouting something about mistakes, about misunderstandings, about how this wasn't what it looked like. I know Ellen was crying, quietly, silently, the way someone cries when they've forgotten how to make noise. The paramedics came. They took Ellen out on a stretcher, wrapped in blankets, her hand reaching for mine as they passed. I held it for a moment, her fingers were so thin, so fragile, before they took her away.
Richard was handcuffed in our driveway, in front of neighbors who'd come out to see what the sirens were about. He was still talking, still explaining, still trying to control the narrative. "She was going to ruin us, Diane. You don't protecting us. I was protecting you." I stood there, watching the man I'd slept beside for 32 years, the man who'd held me when my father died, the man who'd coached our son's baseball teams and fixed leaky faucets and brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, the man who had kept his sister locked in our garage for 6 years while I did laundry 10 feet away. He was still talking when I turned and walked inside. I closed the door, I sat down at the kitchen table, and I stayed there, completely still, until long after the sun went down. The investigation revealed everything. Richard had been planning Ellen's captivity for months before she even arrived at our house. He'd hired a contractor, paid cash, no records, to build the hidden room while I was on a week-long nursing conference in Chicago. He'd told the contractor it was going to be a wine cellar. The contractor, it turned out, had suspected nothing. Richard had drugged Ellen's tea on her 11th night in our house. When she woke up, she was in that room, and Richard was explaining the rules through the locked door. She would stay quiet. She would make no noise ever, under any circumstances. If she did, Richard would tell the police she'd attacked him and fled, and then he would do something to me, something that would look like an accident, a fall down the stairs, a medication error. He showed her news articles on his phone about wives who died in household accidents. He wanted her to understand that he was serious. Ellen believed him. She believed him because she knew her brother, the controlled, calculating, patient brother who'd always resented her, who'd always felt she got more than her share of their mother's love, who'd spent his whole life waiting for a chance to settle the score. The inheritance was real. Their mother had passed in 2015, leaving roughly $340,000 to be split between her children. But Richard had handled the estate, and somehow Ellen's half had never materialized. She'd come to us that September to ask about it, not to figure out her next steps after the divorce, but to find out what had happened to her $170,000. Richard couldn't let her ask those questions, couldn't let her look at the records, talk to a lawyer, discover that he'd forged her signature on documents and funneled her inheritance into his own accounts. So he made her disappear. The postcards were forged. The disconnected phone number was real. Richard had paid Ellen's final bill and canceled the line. The email bounces were real too. He'd logged into her account and deleted it. He'd thought of everything. Everything except a flickering light and an electrician who decided that 3 deadbolts on the outside of a hidden door were worth mentioning. Ellen spent 4 months in the hospital. The physical damage was severe: muscle atrophy, bone density loss, vitamin deficiencies that had affected her heart and her vision. But the psychological damage was worse. 6 years in a room the size of a walk-in closet, with no human contact except the brother who'd imprisoned her, hearing my footsteps above her every morning, forbidden to cry out, forbidden to bang on the walls, forbidden to let me know she was there. She told me later that she'd almost broken 100 times, almost screamed, almost pounded on the walls until her hands bled,
But every time she got close, she'd think about me, about Richard's threats, and she'd stay silent. For 6 years. I don't know how to live with that. I don't know if I ever will. Richard was sentenced to 28 years, unlawful confinement, aggravated assault, fraud, forgery, theft, and a dozen other charges I can't even remember now. His lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, some kind of psychological break, but the premeditation was too clear. The built room, the forged documents, the years of planning. The judge called it one of the most disturbing cases of prolonged cruelty she had seen in her career. I sat in that courtroom for every day of the trial. I watched my husband of 32 years get led away in handcuffs. I did not cry. I did not feel relief. I felt nothing at all, which was perhaps the strangest part. It's been 2 years now since that February afternoon. I sold the house in Lakewood, couldn't walk past that garage anymore, couldn't look at the wall that had hidden so much horror. I live in a small apartment in Tremont now, close enough to downtown that I can walk to the West Side Market on Saturday mornings. Ellen lives in an assisted care facility in Shaker Heights. She's gained back most of the weight she lost. She can walk now, short distances, though she tires easily. She's writing a book about her experience. Her therapist says it helps her process. I visit her every Sunday morning, the time Richard used to spend organizing his tools. We don't talk about him much. We talk about books, about the weather, about her physical therapy progress, about my granddaughter, Michael's daughter, born last spring, the first grandchild I thought Ellen would never meet. Sometimes we just sit in silence together, not the heavy silence of secrets, but the lighter silence of two people who don't need words to understand each other. Ellen asked me once if I blamed myself for not finding her sooner, for not questioning Richard's explanations, for walking past that wall every single morning for 6 years while she sat in darkness on the other side. I told her the truth, every single day. But blame doesn't help her heal. Blame doesn't give her back the years that were stolen. What helps is showing up. What helps is being there now. I think about Richard sometimes, though I try not to. He's in a federal facility in southern Ohio. He writes me letters that I don't open. His lawyer forwards them, says Richard wants to explain himself, wants me to understand his reasoning. But what explanation could justify 6 years of imprisonment? What reasoning could make any of this okay? There is none. There was never going to be. People ask me how I didn't know, how I lived in that house for 6 years with my sister-in-law locked in the garage and never suspected anything. The question used to make me defensive. Now I just tell them the truth. Richard was careful, methodical, patient. He'd spent 32 years cultivating my trust, learning exactly how much I would question and how much I would accept. He knew I believed him. He weaponized that belief. The warning signs were there, in retrospect. The extra locks, the Sunday mornings, the granola bars and water jugs. The way he always volunteered to get things from the garage storage area so I wouldn't have to. But in the moment, none of it seemed suspicious. He was my husband. I loved him. I trusted him completely. Trust is supposed to be the foundation of a marriage, but Richard had turned my trust into a cage, not for me, but for Ellen. If you're watching this and something in your life feels wrong, a locked realm, a strange explanation, a question your spouse won't answer, please don't ignore it. Don't tell yourself you're being paranoid. Don't assume the person you love would never do something terrible. The people closest to us have the most power to harm us. They know our blind spots. They know our patterns. They know exactly how much they can get away with. Ellen survived because a 26-year-old electrician named Jordan thought a hidden door with 3 deadbolts was worth mentioning. One small act of attention saved a woman's life. Pay attention, ask questions, trust your instincts, and remember that the locks on doors aren't always meant to keep strangers out. Sometimes they're meant to keep family in. Ellen and I had coffee last Sunday at a little place in Shaker Square. She's strong enough now to sit in public spaces, to be around people, to exist in the world again. The sun was coming through the window, falling across her face, and she closed her eyes for a moment just to feel it. I used to dream about this, she said quietly, sitting somewhere warm, drinking coffee, feeling the sun. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. She opened her eyes and looked at me, and for the first time since that February afternoon, I saw something that looked like peace. Thank you, she said quietly, for not giving up on me, even when you didn't know you were supposed to be looking. I squeezed her hand. I didn't have words. I don't think I needed them. We finished our coffee in silence, watching the light move across the table, two women who had survived something that should have destroyed us both. The truth came out eventually. It took 6 years and a flickering light, but it came out. And Ellen is alive, and I'm still here. And somehow, against all odds, we're finding our way forward. That's the only ending I can offer. Not a happy one, exactly, but a real one. And sometimes, real is enough. Would you have seen the signs? Or would you have trusted like I did until it was almost too late? Let me know in the comments.